To introduce our next speaker is Andy Cooperman. Thank you, Andy, for that introduction. Andy's taller than Andy. Our next speaker, Christine Clark, comes to us from just down the road in Portland, Oregon. Christine is the head of the metals department at OCAC. It used to be OSAC, but now it's OCAC, Oregon College of Art and Craft. It's a remarkable place with amazing instructors and students. Christine received her BFA right here in the Emerald City at the University of Washington and her MFA at RIT. I want to say MOUSE afterwards because there's a lot of initials. At any rate, in addition to her gig at OCAC, Christine teaches workshops around the country, Aramont, Penland, Haystack, the usuals. She competes for and wins public arts commissions, participates in group shows and stages solo exhibitions, and has twice received the Oregon Arts Commission Fellowship Grant. Christine has been awarded a coveted and prestigious John Michael Kohler Arts and Industry Residency. That's 3 months at the Kohler Sink and Tub Factory in Wisconsin, where artists are free to follow their wishes any way they want with equipment and staff. It's really an amazing thing. She speaks nationally about her work, and this is, in fact, her second time speaking for us here at the Symposium. Now, at this point in the introduction, I usually try to share a personal story. There is one that immediately springs to mind, involving a lecture and 2 dog noses, but I don't think my memory is all that clear, and I don't know that I want to share any of it in public. So, let me just say that I'm a little in awe of Christine's energy, as well as her aesthetic and her tireless desire to move ahead and self-improve, to change things up and reinvent things in life and in the studio across scale and material. I'm also in awe of her easy laugh and her ease in life. Please welcome Christine Clark.
Hi, everybody. I have to make a correction, Andy. It's OCAC. Not OCAC. You're like gagging. Not OCAC. OCAC, right? I have a bunch of students here. I couldn't correct you from way down there. So thanks so much for having me. I am so happy to be here amongst my fellow metalsmiths. I feel really, really comfortable talking with this group of people. It's easy for me to talk to this group of people, which, you know, I guess I feel lucky that I get to be here, and thanks. And I'm going to talk about my craft and my studio practice, what I think about when I work, and conceptually what I'm interested in. And what I'm doing right now for the past 10 years is I've been working as an installation artist, and so I consider myself an installation artist, even though I've really only been practicing it for like the last 10 years or so, with a greater understanding of what that means. But I also describe myself as one who makes sculpture and a craftsperson, which is what I'm most proud of. So I put on my craft badge and I wear it very, very proudly. I make no apologies whatsoever, even amongst those who don't have any idea of what that means. Starting with some influences. There are so many, as we all have influences, but I really need to start with Alexander Calder. And you're probably all thinking, oh my God, everyone loves Calder. No, but I really love Calder. No. So you just have to understand that right now. And he was a great inspiration to me from the beginning when I started doing installation art. So and I can go on and on about him, but the thing that I appreciate about him the most is that he was just a regular guy. He was like a stable family man. And I know now I'm talking about him as the man, but him as the man and the work, it all works together, right? He wasn't a drug addict. He wasn't an abuser. He wasn't a suicide victim. He was just this goofball and just extremely prolific and hardworking till the day he died. He worked with the wire a lot, especially in his earlier work. And you know he made jewelry. He never sold it though. He only made it for friends and family. I'm enamored by his shapes. These are my shapes. I cannot stop drawing them and including them in my work. And this is his studio in 1941. And look at, this is an installation right here. And then look at him with his parallel jaw pliers. I love it so much. I have to tell this really quick story. So I practiced this with a friend of mine who is not a metalsmith at all. And he's like, why are you showing that? And I said, trust me, they'll like it. So this is an exhibition at MIT in 1950 that inspired me to do this installation called Drawn Wire. So I have to tell you the 5 most important things about my work right now. My love affair with wire and materials in general. The process is the part of the idea. The importance of craft, working with my hands, and the idea of abstraction coupled with a concept, which I know is a contradiction, and if we got into a discussion about abstraction, I would be totally shot down. But that's one of the things that's important to me. Wire is this incredible thing. The fact that you can create volume with a singular linear element completely fascinates me. It has basically 2 characteristics, length and gauge. So I found this familiarity with wire that I love so much, and I'm so comfortable handling it. And this is where the process part comes in. The shapes I work with come from snippets of the figure that I've worked with in the past, but now I want the shapes to lose that association with the figure and become confused with other things like vessels, food, plants, or just be these indescribable, unusual shapes. The maker in me is the part that I revere the most in terms of creating physical things, and then there's the process. So I've been measuring, bending, cutting, welding wire over and over again. I'm repeating my actions continually while I'm listening to music, I'm listening to the radio or audiobooks or the thoughts in my mind, and rarely at all when I do this repetitive work do I dread what I'm doing. So while I'm sitting in my studio doing this repetitive work, I really think about how it's like some kind of punishment. And I know punishment is really the wrong word for it, but it's some kind of right or some path that I need to go through. Even though bending wire and it seems like such a mundane thing and really meaningless in the whole scheme of things, to call it like a path in life. But even the art part of it disappears for me. So it's like I've been put down on the planet to do this thing, which is like super corny thought, but it's like my part of the system or the workings of the world. And it reminds me so much of people like Tom Friedman. He's this brilliant, but I'm labeling him a crazy person who does work that is so ultimately about process, and it's so much about the art of making in a really highly conceptual way. His work is painstaking and it's unheroic. It suggests to me a new direction in art, like post-video, post-identity issues, post-media, post-ready-made. His work is basic. So this piece is loops of masking tape that's stuck together on the floor. You know how you can turn it backwards and have it stick to itself, making a big circle that's about 72 inches across. So this is stuffing from a pillow that he separated strand by strand to make this big pile on the floor. So this pile is about 30 inches. This is 9 total cereal boxes that are cut into small squares and meticulously put back together to make one large box. So this photograph looks out of focus, but it's not. It is like the little squares that are kind of slightly offset on one another. And so this box ends up being about 30 inches tall. Hole punch paper dots laminated together to make one long cylindrical dowel. His craftsmanship is perfect. Think of what this thing would look like if it had glue globs on it or if it was a mess. It would totally fail. So his concept has nothing to do with mine, but his process has everything to do with the idea, and that's the part of the thing that I'm really interested in. And his work is brilliantly simple. And this is something that I tell my students all the time. brilliantly simple is good. This is the artist's signature written on the wall until the pen ran out of ink. So it's about 42 inches across. So I did an installation called 22 gauge. This piece was primarily made of 22 gauge wire, and the work protruding from the walls is continuous around the whole gallery. Here again, I'm preserving the notion of creating a singular linear element. The body of work that forms a whole has forms a whole, but has no clear definable shapes within each piece, but it conforms to the shape of the room, which makes a shape. So here's the part about installation art that I really admire. So with an installation like this, I have quite a bit of control over my viewer. So my viewer steps into the gallery, and they're inundated with their work all the way around the room. So then they do one of a couple things. They like go up close, and then they back up, and then they turn around, and they turn around again, and they go close, and they back up, and they turn again, and they turn again, and then they leave. So if you removed the work and just showed the viewer's emotions, it would be like this little dance. I love that. And you know, sometimes you can be voyeuristic a little bit and stand outside and watch these people do this. It's so great. So here's here's a couple production shots. It's auto saving here. Okay. Spinning wheel of death. So these are the shapes that are not welded yet. The poles in size order, bundled in size order, in the gallery setting up with all the chains hanging down. All the chains, by the way, are handmade. You get a little help from your friends and your family. It took 3 of us 4 long days to install this piece. So I went to a Nikki McClure lecture a couple of years ago. She does these really intense paper cutouts. I think some of you might know who she lives up in Olympia. And there was one really important thing that I walked away from with her from her lecture was that she said you work and you work and you work, and that's all you do is work. There's nothing really anything else. You just work. And then she said that you don't sit around and wait for the phone to ring for some opportunity. You just work, and you keep working until the phone does ring for you eventually. So for me, it's my studio work, it's my teaching, it's my department head work, it's working in the garden, it's working on the house. It's all work, and it's all me. So a quote on the subject about work that we've all heard from Thomas Edison, which is, "Genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration." So I'm going to read you a small part of my artist statement from this installation. "The work I do is repetitive, meticulous, and laborious in nature. As I'm making, I think of what my hands are doing and consider these repetitive motions a primal part of human beings. Through time, we are constantly repeating ourselves to better our world, whether it's preparing food, creating art, or brushing our teeth. We go through these motions because we have a drive to do so, and often our actions become automatic. We forget what we've just done only because it needs to be completed. I am intrigued by the notion of intensely handling thousands of pieces of wire, some several times each, coupled with the idea that perhaps my viewer's eyes will scan over it in a matter of seconds. This idea alone is worth all the work I've done. The act of making is the art to me, and hopefully, at the same time, I've created something visually interesting." So I think about the British artist Antony Gormley. This is an installation that he did at Christian Albrecht's University in Germany from 1993, and it's 40,000 terracotta figures. This is repetition and multiples at its best. Nothing else can be added. And it's so awe-inspiring to me to see this, and it's especially important that it's in and amongst the museum's historical collection that's on the wall unchanged. It's like this intervention, a juxtaposition of the artist's work that interferes with the museum site. And here's another one that he did in, it's called Insight 92, a community-wide exhibition of installation art in San Diego and Tijuana, Mexico. That would have been amazing. So this piece is called Field, and it suggests the world's population explosion, but it was also a tribute to the loving craftsmanship of the Mexican people, the Mexican potters and ceramic artists, many of whom helped Gormley create a lot of these figures. And this one is my favorite. He's amongst 180,000 of these at the Sydney Biennial. So I have to tell you the story. Mary is my partner. She and I are in LA, and it's May. School just got out. Here we are at Disneyland. I love Disneyland, by the way. I get a call from a 9 gallery member, and I'm a member of this alternative gallery space, and he says to me, so I just wanted to let you know that I'm taking my show down on Sunday, and you'll be able to set yours up. And I was like, what? I find out that I have a show in 2 weeks, in June, and I didn't even know it. Somehow I got it in my mind that my show was in October. And I actually started work on something for the show in October. And so I panic. I totally panic. So Mary, the person who always knows how to calm me, drives me to the Dresden room. And I only put this slide in because the Dresden room in LA is just such an amazing place. And we have a cocktail. And we have 2 cocktails. We have 3 cocktails, and we're drawing on cocktail napkins, and we're talking, and I'm panicking, and we're talking, and I am beside myself in panic because, first of all, I'm not home. I'm in LA, right? Secondly, I'm a planner, and I don't have a plan right now. I think I have it all figured out, and I have no plan. And Mary is not a planner, and she is totally right now in her element. So we decide to do this collaborative installation called Light and Shadow, and I haven't done a lot of collaborative things because I tend to think I'm pretty sure about the way things should be, which means bossy, right? So I thought we would try this though, I mean, what choice do I have, right? So the shadows that my work makes are pretty great within themselves, and we came up with the idea of painting them on the wall. And so I made these 3 larger shapes, and I had them powder coated white, and then we painted the shadows on the walls. Okay, let's see. So we overlapped them and painted them around the room. And Mary's background is in illustration and scenic painting, and she's done a lot of hand sign painting, so she can like pull a line with one fell swoop and have it be perfect. One of those kind of people. And here again, I've used the whole space, forcing the viewer to turn around and around, doing their little dance. Shadows, the shadow is an object. It's a byproduct of the work, but indeed it exists. The overlapping shapes and the foreshortened angles that were created made these really wonderful abstracted shapes. So working out of my comfort zone was completely liberating and super fun. So when you're stuck, loosening up and experimenting is a really great exercise. I don't think I ever would have come up with this idea if I hadn't found myself in this situation. So after I just finished talking about work, I can't tell you how utterly refreshing it was to do an installation that took 2 weeks rather than something that takes a year or 9 months. Collective object is an abstract account of objects in our lives. Objects encircle us daily, tangible elements that make up our homes, which hold an importance that varies with each individual. We collect objects for fun, investment, relaxation, social interaction, nostalgia, control, and a host of other reasons reaching back to basic human instinct and the will to survive. The notion of ownership gives us a sense of power and compels us to hold on to those objects. They often serve as markers of time, even as these objects shift importance from some heightened meaning to something forgotten. Our desire to hang on to that object prevails. It's an abstract idea. The objects in this installation transcend from something specific to a generic representation of who we are and why we collect. Each of the objects is handmade, placing a hold on the notion that care and thought is put into the things we regard valuable. And although each piece has its own characteristic, I want to represent a commonality in people that removes us from the specifics of being an individual, transforming us into a collective whole. They change in shape from one thing to another, suggesting the transformation of meaning objects hold in our lives. As a whole, it creates a singular experience of suspended meaning. It resounds with latent memories of things or ideas once felt but become intangible with time. It is a narrative that is no longer yours. Okay, so last month I was asked to be a guest lecturer for one of our MFA classes, for one of our MFA seminars, and I led a 4.5-hour class on the subject of failure. And that's the subject for the semester for the MFA students is failure. So I gave them readings and we had a really great discussion, and I also asked them to show a piece that they consider a failure of their own that they've made. And I asked them to think about 5 questions, or a bunch actually, but I'm just reading you 4 here. How do you feel about your intention? Was it a worthy cause? When did you first consider the work a failure? How do you feel about your intention now that you consider the work a failure? Have you reevaluated the work since you labeled it a failure? So I volunteered to show my failure, and I'm going to share it with you now. So I made this piece with over 1,000 of these very carefully welded forms. I learned how to make paper. I made this special abacus paper that was really thin, and when it's wet, you can stretch it over a form, and it dries really tight like gut. And the paper does this beautiful thing over these wire forms, and these forms range from this big to like this big. And it does this beautiful patina on it, and I was really pleased with the pieces, and I was pleased with my idea, and I, set most of it up in my studio. So I need to read you my artist, or part of my artist statement, because I have to tell you what my intention was. Okay, herded. A non-figurative portrayal of how people are influenced by their peers as they abandon their own confidences. Herd mentality and other kinds of conformist behaviors have been prevalent since people formed tribes and migrated in groups. We act together without planned direction as we react to subtle unconscious influences. We voluntarily acquiesce to some suggestion without critical analysis or research, thus undermining our individuality. We find ourselves on the inside of a trend, whether it's some inclination to fashion, social networking, or politics. In making the elements for this installation, I'm on the outside looking in. I'm reminded of schools of fish, herds of sheep, or iron particles converging toward a magnet. There are those in the center, the leaders who transform an idea into an influential movement. Followers gather momentum, amassing next to one another, creating a throng, a collective body that exhibits beauty in its numbers. Okay, ready to see the full view? It looks like a giant vagina. What do you do about that? I couldn't even answer those questions I posed to my students. So you're probably wondering why I even put this in here. You're like, oh my God, there's all these people and she's showing this like giant vagina here. There's nothing in my intention that has anything to do with a giant vagina. But I put this in here because it reminds me that failure is a way to grow, and taking risks is really important as an artist. Most of the time, in installation art, you can't test out your whole idea. You gather the elements, and you trust that your idea and the materials you choose will deliver for you, and you take a chance, and you allow yourself to be open and vulnerable as hard as it is. Think of something simple, a smooth gray river rock, or a single blade of grass. Look at its contour, edges, and texture. On the surface, there may not be that much to see. With deeper observation and speculative thought, the object becomes intricate. It has a complex molecular structure. It has a history. It's part of something larger. Step away from that object and it loses its characteristics. It becomes a shape in the distance that leaves us with a smudge of color. What if we looked at a multitude of these objects? A field of grass, a riverbank of rocks, a stand of trees. The group together becomes a spectacular sight. We express awe in the multitude of these things together, compiling into a new prospect. Apply this to a crowd of people, a moving jumble of humanity. Focus closer and see the individuals with their plethora of characteristics, a multitude of weird, funny, admirable, repulsive, idiosyncratic distinctiveness that comes in thousands of variables. Our involvement can change through the position in which we stand. We choose, we can stay, we can turn and walk away, we can revisit or we can forget. Our memories can be fed, refueled, or starve and die. We can do this in everything we observe and absorb in our lives. A mass. Come close and look at the simplicity and form. Smooth lines and shapes coming together to form eddies of negative space, overlapping one another depending upon where you stand. It's ever changing as you move around. Just add color. The mix becomes more complex. Step back and the colors and shapes become blurred. Now see a field of flowers, a stand of trees, rocks on a slope, or people in a crowd. Okay, so we're going on to Kohler. I was fortunate enough last year to have a year-long sabbatical, and sabbaticals are completely few and far between, I have to say. And so I wanted to make the total most of it. And fortunately also, I was granted John Michael Kohler Arts and Industry Residency, and I had known about this residency for 30 years. This residency has been going on for 40 years. They had their 40th anniversary when I was there. And at that time when I first knew about it, I was just this like nothing young artist, and I wouldn't be able to make the cut. It's very competitive. And then I had a child. So that kind of like blew everything out of the water because I didn't want to go to Kohler for just a short time and then while I was there for a short time feel totally guilty the whole time. So I waited until my daughter went off to college. And then I applied and I got it. And it was everything that I hoped for and so much more. I was immediately immersed in the factory. It is enormous and it has so much history. It's dark and it's dirty and it's smelly and really dangerous. There's fire and molten metal everywhere you turn. You need to watch, like there's, the aisleways, you need to watch where you're going because these forklifts that are filled with molten metal and flames coming out of them are like screaming down the aisles. It's really, it's like, whoa, that kind of thing all the time. This is an enormous crucible as big as a dump truck. And it's filled from a huger furnace, and this thing is filling the huge crucibles that then tip and fill those forklifts that I just showed you a picture of. And the other thing that's so amazing about it too is so there's like this huge furnace, and then that's the molten metals transferred to another furnace, and then that's transferred to the smaller furnace, and then it's transferred to the forklifts, and then it's transferred to the crucibles that they pour the metal in. They don't even reheat it. It is so hot that through all that travel, it stays completely molten and red. It's like mind-blowing. So this is just a shot of the automated production line called the Herman. You make friends with the foreman, and they'll take you anywhere. So the automated line does all the double sinks and the huge tubs and things like that. But a lot of it is poured by hand. And this is a semi-automatic line called the Osborne line. And this is the artist studio, which is pretty much smack dab in the middle of the iron foundry. And I am completely entrenched into factory life. I have 24/7 access to this studio and all the help I can ask for. So this was my space. It's pretty large. It goes all the way back to that blue oven that you see way in the back of the studio. And to get from the women's locker room to the studio, you had to walk between these moving conveyor belts of these tubs, walking like in front of your past. You're, waiting for the tub, and then you run past. And so the work I did was extremely physically challenging. You cannot be a weakling. You are doing a lot of stuff by yourself and lifting a lot of heavy things. I'm here at the Pepset machine filling my flask, and Pepset is it's really fine sand that's mixed with a chemical that once you get it in your flask, it sets up in like 3 minutes. And then there's this 7-inch grinder. They have smaller grinders, but it's just the small grinders just take too long. So I'm like wrestling with this big grinder, and by the end of 3 months, I could do it like really easily. It was really great. And so then there was this hood thingy. I have to tell you about the hood thingy. So it's September, and it's really hot, and the factory is like boiling hot, and I'm grinding away, and I'm sweating, and it's like awful. And then Garrett, who's the studio technician, comes up to me, and he says, "Do you want to use the hood?" And I was like, "What hood?" And so he gives me this thing, and it's like, it goes over your head, and it goes around your neck, and down on your shoulders, and there's like this filter pack in the front, and this hose, and it goes to you can see the yellow line. See, I'm connected to this line. And if you looked really close, you could see my arms are black. So anyway, this thing was like magic. Like all this cool air is like going past my face, and I could grind all day. So one of my studio mates, he's like, and it's loud. It's like, oh my God, is she gonna stop? So I finally stop, and my studio mate says, "You have been grinding all day. Would you stop?" But I could because of this thing. It was so great. So I was also required to learn how to drive a forklift, which was the most fun in the world. I can't even tell you. The artist studio didn't have their own forklift, and so it sometimes is hard to find one. So I got really good at stealing them. So I'd figure out when someone was on a break or when they went on a different machine, and I'd jump in and I would steal the forklift, and it would be gone. And sometimes they'd be like, they'd find me, But anyway, I had to use the forklift on a lot of the stuff. So like you can see, there's 4 big molds on this cart, and each mold weighs probably 300 or 400 pounds. They're really, really heavy. So you can see I just picked up the whole cart because it's just like way too heavy to push. And then pouring some of my smaller molds with a hand crucible. And here they're pouring those larger molds that I just showed, and with the pneumatic crucible. And I love that it's all splashy and there's metal going everywhere. It was so exciting. I was just like totally in heaven. And look here, he is totally missing. Do you see? He's missing, and it's okay. It just cools, and then they sweep it up, and it's all recyclable. It's just, oh, it's iron, yeah. So molds just being finished poured. These are the smaller ones, and depending upon how large the molds are, they stay hot from 2 to 5 hours. It's hot, yeah. So then you bring it outside. You take a sledgehammer and you crack them open, and it's like Christmas. So this is the brass foundry. I only cast one brass piece because I wanted to get a high polish on it and put a chrome finish on it. But the brass foundry is like, the equipment is ancient, it's old, but they still use it. It's like totally functional. And you can see over there the brass that's just on the ground there, and they're just like taking a shovel and shoveling it in. And there's like stuff like this everywhere, these old carts. These are from the turn of the century, and they still use them. And so much to see in the factory. So I would just like go around and explore, and I was getting lost. I was like way down, like way in the basement. I would just jump in the freight elevator and just kind of push a button and go explore, because people they'd say, "Who are you?" And I'd say, "Oh, I'm an artist." And they go, "Okay," because they all know the artists, that there are artists around. So anyway, just to give you a sense of scale, that dumpster is like taller than I am. So this is a big pile of the sand. And then there's just piles of metal, scrap metal, sprues, gates, miscellaneous iron. Everything is sorted and put into different piles. So 100% of Kohler's iron is from recycled material. They don't use any new material at all. And so there's trucks constantly shipping in these huge all this recycled material. And I made friends with one of the foremen, and he took me up on that crane, and that's like 50 feet up in the air, and it's the big crane that goes back and forth with the big magnet that picks up the metal, I got to go up there. It was so cool. And then there's just piles and piles of cast iron parts everywhere. This like beautiful patterns made from all these bins of stuff that you see. These are the fancy legs from the expensive birthday tub. And then like crankshafts, just like on and on as far as you can see. And then there were the things like this. These are train car sized bins of these, I don't know, are they engine parts sitting outside? Like what? What are they here for? Just like the patterns of stuff made. So this is all to be recycled. More cast brass recycled stuff that were rejects. Like stacks of bars of brass, because like our casting process, the brass needs to be a percentage of clean metal. Sinks everywhere you look. Sinks, tubs, just everywhere. And then you come across these really weird things like, what is that? So I have no idea what this is, but, and I have lots of pictures like this, and I actually ended up having to edit a bunch because I didn't want my talk to go on and on and on. But, and look at this chair. This chair killed me. And they use this chair, like every day, someone sits in this chair, and then look at this water fountain. It is filthy. And you push the button, the water comes out. So great. So one of my favorite things about being at Kohler were the people. So these people that I worked with, they're Kohler lifers. The people had been there 15, 20, 30, retire at 40 years. This is Garrett Kruger, and he's not one of them. He's the Foundry Artist Studio technician. He is employed by the John Michael Kohler Art Center, not the Kohler Company. And he works 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, for 2 residents. It's like anything for you, Christine. So great. He had a lot of other stuff to do, but I would say, Garrett, when you have a chance, and he'd just come right over. It'd be great. Carl, where's John? Carl, right? Always wears coveralls like this. He was my favorite guy. I always came up to him and said, will you pour my thing for me? Tom teased me every time I walked by. I had to walk by, and my space was like in eye line sight of his working area, and he would just give me the hardest time all the time. Packers fan, they're all Packers fans, they're all deer hunters. This guy is a many-time Wisconsin and national arm wrestling champion. And he helped me a lot, like push, and move heavy stuff. Mark, the tool guy, he he fixed the tools. He'd come in all the time and troubleshoot problems that I had. This is Larry, right? Larry, my favorite person. He's a layout guy. Chris, another one of my favorite people. The only, as we know it, openly gay man in the iron factory. This is Gary. He's an enamel iron pourer, and he had something to do with the Pepset thing. And he did all the specialty hand-poured enamel pieces. And this is Bob. Do you see Bob? Bob, this is his sandblasting booth. So, those tubs I said they're going by, some of the tubs that had rejected enamel would go into his booth, and he would sandblast the enamel off of the thing, and then it would go by, and then another tub would come in, and he'd sandblast. He has been in this booth for 25 years, and he has 15 more to go. I'm not exaggerating. So I was there for 3 months and a week, and I came home with over 1,000 pounds of iron. This pallet was delivered to my studio in Portland. So the concept of my work was weight, personal emotional weight. Some of the work was enameled, some of it was chromed, and the rest was patinaed black. And I did a lot of hanging pieces. I made my own chain. That was the white series. This is the black series. I think you guys have all seen this on the postcard. This is the cluster series. These are solid pieces that represent the little bits of weight that we add to ourselves. Floor standing pieces, and that huge chain I cast with no openings. I did that. Enamel detail. Okay, so Ucross. I returned home in mid-December from Kohler, and I was home for about 2 months, and then I went to another residency in Ucross, Wyoming. It's a gorgeous area of Wyoming, 45 minutes near Sheridan, a couple hours south of Montana border. Ucross Foundation has had a residency program for over 30 years, and it really is considered one of the best residency programs in the country. I mean, Kohler, of course, that's like internationally the best. This is like nationally one of the best residencies. I was treated like a queen. Gourmet chef, I ate so much. Like meals, and then lunch delivered quietly, put by your door, and then they run away so they don't disturb you. You know, rules like you cannot knock on someone's door, you have to be invited. Even the sheets in the bedrooms were like 300 count. I'm not kidding. Ucross is on 22,000 acres of leased ranch land. So the Ucross Foundation owns it, and they lease it to a rancher. And this is what it looks like right outside the studios. So this is the schoolhouse. It's an original schoolhouse that was on the property, and this is where we had our meals. And my bedroom and a couple other people's bedroom was in here. There were 9 of us: visual artists, writers, composers, musicians. So I had a lovely 1-mile walk to and from the studio, and I did that at least a couple of times a day, sometimes 3 times a day. And late at night, I would leave the studio at like midnight or 1 a.m., and I'd walk along this road, and it was just lit by the stars. It was kind of amazing. So my studio is the door on the left. This is called the Rock Studios. I was in Rock 1. This view from my double doors. This is my studio, completely diametrically opposed to Kohler. Utterly quiet, serene. It smelled lovely. It was like I was like in heaven here. All you heard was the birds, and the sandhill cranes were migrating. It was kind of amazing. There was nothing in this room. When I walked in, there was nothing but sawhorses and wood for tabletops stacked in the corner. The room was completely empty. So I did bring my oxyacetylene tanks, and I brought my hand tools, I brought my sewing machine, and I brought some fabric. So this is some of the work that I produced in the month I was there. I wanted to continue my work with weight. I collected rocks that were on the riverbank or along the road that I walked. And I worked really late nights, and I got a lot done. So weight. Okay, so between my residency at Ucross, and then I had a solo show in July, I went for a month to Iceland. But that's a whole nother story. Okay, we're not going to go on to the travel log. But here we'll go on to the installation weight. So I put together the work I did in both residencies and came with this installation of hanging and floor-sitting pieces, and here's my artist statement. Weight, having numerous definitions, is defined as a measure of the heaviness of an object, a counterbalance, a bias, excessive fat, importance, authority, pressure, oppressiveness, a burden. The last 3 similes extend philosophically deeper into the association of how weight affects one's daily life. Weight is not seen, only felt, often deceptive. This emotional feeling is perceived through a demonstrative viewpoint. We are surrounded and burdened by the weight of responsibility, tragedy, joy, trouble, fiscal accountability, or the sentimentality of objects. I can see weight oozing, slowly headed for contact with our psyche. It touches our feet as it is absorbed through our souls. It hovers like a harmless cloud, turning into an anvil on our shoulders. Because we are strong, we say, bring it on. Letting go is a different story. So many variables make it tricky to sort the imperative aspects from the refuse. In my mind, it is an abstract concept that warrants visual recognition. In all its glory and gloom, my portrayal of the weight we carry is represented here. Okay, so just when you think I've done enough, in addition to the month-long residency at UCross and then everything else I did, I went and took a month trip to Korea and China. So I did that, and then I came back, and I had one more thing that I had to do before school started, which was September 1st. I did this public art project that I actually started a long time ago. It had been in the works for almost 2 years, but of course it had to be installed, you know, like days or the day school started. So and this is it's in the Pierce Library, the main library at Eastern Oregon University in La Grande, Oregon. It's about 12 feet tall, 50 feet long, and 7 feet wide. And it hangs over this light well that opens up the lower floor of the library, because there's a library in the basement, and they did this huge renovation to this beautiful 1940s Art Moderne building, and the basement was very oppressive, so they opened up the space. So from the basement all the way up, it's about 30 feet, and this is the view looking up. So I'm like underneath the piece looking up, like looking from the north, and this is up underneath looking from the south. And this is on the main floor. And it's a series of rectangles that are reflective of those beautiful windows from the 1940s. And then I included these large hoops that were laser cut from 1/2-inch plate steel, sheet steel. And then I made all these woven wire volumetric forms. So everything is powder coated matte black, and it's hung on handmade chain. That's welded and weight tested to 200 pounds. So I made the chain, made all the jump rings, welded each link, and then weight tested it. And the chain is 12 and 14 gauge mild steel. You'd be really amazed at how the 12 gauge wire, all welded, actually held 225 pounds, and the 14 gauge held 125 pounds. It was kind of amazing. So then there's these woven pieces, and you can see this piece from 3 vantage points. This is the main floor, and then I showed you the lower floor, and then this is from the mezzanine. There's a mezzanine level. So this is the 50 feet total, so you can see the whole thing. And this is my crew. So I had 5 guys installing this. There was one main person that I hired, and he was brilliant. And in fact, I kind of didn't even really need to be there. I mean, of course I did, but I just let him do his thing. I made an enormous I made a to scale map that laid across the floor, and they transposed what was on my map up into the ceiling. And what's kind of amazing here is that that's a drop ceiling. It's wood, like wood, these wood panels that come down, and we had to go the weekend before and install up on the beams that, you know, the ceiling, the structure of the building. We installed all this unistrut that was going to hold my piece, and then we went away and came back. They had put the ceiling back up, and then we had to fish hardware up through this. Sometimes the unistrut was 6 inches away. Sometimes it was 42 inches away. So they're feeding hardware up there and screwing it in, and then the chains get hung from that. It was like really an amazing feat. So anyway, here they are putting up the first pieces, the final pieces. I started my sabbatical in September, and then this ended September 1st. So I hope I've illustrated my love for making and my working with fine, tiny wire to like bigger things, and it's all a part of this process that I just absolutely love. And I don't know, it doesn't matter what I do, I just do it. So thank you very much.